The world is old and the powers are weary. The god at the door of night has fallen, and the great enemy of the world has come back from the timeless void. The shadow has awakened the great evils to regain dominion over Ardar. Darkness shall cover the land, if not of the deeds of a small fellowship of elf friends. Join the players of this Dungeons & Dragons campaign as they fulfill the events of the Dark or Daggeroth prophecy and strive with Morgoth on the plains of Valinor. Welcome to the Undying Lands in Part 3 of the Inglorion Bastards trilogy, Trials of the Valor.
So welcome everybody to episode 112 of the Inglorion Bastards campaign / podcast. With me today, I have two friends of the podcast, two people that I've been talking with over the last couple months who have told me in various formats that they've enjoyed the podcast. So I'm interested to learn more from them. And they have brought some questions for me so that after I'm done grilling them, they can grill me. So I'd like to welcome Liam and Bea to the podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
Great. Well, let's have Liam go first. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. We know your name already, but where are you from, at least approximately, and your experience with Tolkien and Dungeons and Dragons.
Of course. Okay. So I live in Arizona currently. I'm from Illinois originally. I guess I'd start with Tolkien because I've been reading his stuff longer than I've been playing D&D.
Mm-hmm.
So the first Tolkien book I read was The Children of Hurin.
Ah, good choice.
And that was mostly just because it was on my mother's bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
And the cover is pretty cool looking. So I read that, and then I got The Hobbit for Valentine's Day shortly after that, and then I read Lord of the Rings. It's kind of the vague history. I've read a lot of his other stuff, of course, too. As far as Dungeons & Dragons goes, I started playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons in 2018, but I started playing tabletop role-playing games in, I think it was 2013 with Star Wars Age of the Empire, actually. So.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
So, but I like to play D&D. I don't get the opportunity very often, so that's me, I guess.
Well, Liam, you have an interesting sort of order of read through the Tolkien universe. A lot of times people will come first to The Hobbit, then to the Lord of the Rings, or actually a lot of the younger people that I've talked to have started with the movies and kind of, some of them move on to the Silmarillion, some of them don't. Now, I know you are, you pride yourself on being a philologist, right? Or an aspiring philologist. So my guess is you have read the Silmarillion. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Speaking of the Children of Hurin, I absolutely love that. That was sort of in the Silmarillion, the story of Turin was my favorite part. But as far as sort of the extra, the longer stories that Christopher has just recently published, The Children of Hurin, The Fall of Gondolin, Beren and Luthien, The Children of Hurin are my favorite of those three, just based on the way they chose to put it together. It seems to me that The Fall of Gondolin and Beren and Luthien, though near and dear to my heart, he used kind of a different form. It seemed that he's like a different format when he was putting them together, using some original names that J.R.R. had used in some of the earlier versions of the story. Have you got a chance to read either The Fall of Gondolin or Beren and Luthien?
Of sorts. I haven't sat down and read through the entire thing, word by word, but I have been able to study them a little bit. And I agree, they're a little bit more fragmentary, like the history of Middle-earth is probably a good comparison.
Yeah.
And so I really do enjoy Beren and Luthien and how you get the different versions of the story. It's interesting to see, for example, where like Sauron comes from, and originally how he is where that character evolved from was the Lord of Cats, or the Prince of Cats. So
It's just hard for me I love these stories, and I have a particular sort of angle in my head of like who is named what, and when I have to like continually remind myself, okay, who is this again? Like let me flip to the front of the book and find out which. Okay, now I've got it. It's just a little harder for me. Well, let's go on to B. B, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh boy. Yeah, sure. I'm from Norway. I first got into Lord of the Rings when I found a VHS tape of the 1970-something animated version of the movie at the library when I was a kid.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
I'm curious. What did you think of that?
Well, I loved it.
Yeah.
The first time I saw it, I'm like, oh my God, I love this. I have to read the book. Like, I was probably about 11 years old at that time. And that was around the time, actually it was a little bit before the posters for the Lord of the Rings movies were starting to show up.
Oh.
So, the Fellowship of the Ring. So, I went and I borrowed the book from one of my classmates in Norwegian, translated, and I devoured it. Went on to reading like in English later on after the movies. I've also read The Hobbit. Silmarillion is my favorite.
Ah, yes.
I have a particular love for the Sons of Fëanor.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the Histories of Middle-earth. My husband gives me a new edition almost every year.
That's awesome. He knows you well.
He knows me very well. As for D&D, I got into D&D when the proprietor at a local fantasy bookstore introduced me to the phenomenon when I was about 15 years old. And then I played at least one campaign every week, so one session every week at least, for about 3-4 years. And then I moved to the US to study, and then I didn't have time anymore or a group to play with, so...
I'm a little jealous of you playing for every weekend for 3 years.
I was a kid,
Yeah.
I didn't have to study either because everything came to me very easily. So at least then, university was totally different. But yeah.
Well, you mentioned your love of Mithras and Maglor and that family. So this podcast episode will air in a really good place in terms of their story. So we've already experienced bits and pieces of the Mithras Silmaril, and coming up here very soon, we're going to the characters, I should say, will be undertaking the trial of Ulmo, and we'll be looking for both Maglor and the Silmaril of Maglor. And we know from our reading that Maglor is still probably wandering around somewhere, having been burned by the Silmaril, and who knows what he's doing. But I try to provide that answer in the podcast. So, well, let's see here. So the next question I have for you is really about how you found the podcast. Sort of what were you looking for at the time when you stumbled across it? Because each of you, I believe, probably came about the podcast in a different way. We'll go back to Liam for this.
So I was actually, this wasn't even that long ago. It was like, I don't even think it was 2 months ago, but I was on reallevels.net
Yep.
looking for names.
And what were you looking for names for? Were you, a story you're writing, or just out of just interest?
So it was for Adventures in Middle-earth characters. Actually,
Nice.
I had just gotten all the books from the Humble Bundle that they had offered. And so I was like, okay, I want my names to be, something that would fit in lore, as close as I could get, because I don't know, my Elvish isn't really good at all, so.
It's probably better than mine. so just so the listener sort of remembers, realelvish.net is Fiona Joling's website, and she has a ton of resources up there for people, especially specifically for this, to name characters for stories and for role playing. And so I knew that you were. I thought you were connected with Fiona somehow, watching your comments on the YouTube channel, I can tell just how much you're into language. You say your Elvish is not that good, but I'm impressed by all of the comments that you left on there. I always have to look them up. Like, what is Liam saying now?
Yeah, language has always been interesting to me. So I feel like my knowledge is very fragmentary sometimes, but I try to know as much as I can. I think that's the real heart of any culture, even if it's made up on Middle Earth. So.
Agreed. Well, Bea, what about you?
Actually, I was looking for the Tolkien Professor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went on Spotify and I was like, maybe his podcast is on here. I never found it. But I found the interview that you did with him. And it really piqued my interest. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. So this is like a D&D podcast. And my husband listens to Adventure Zone or whatever it's called.
Oh, yeah. My friends love Adventure Zone.
Yeah, it's a fun one. It's not quite my alley. It's more his alley. He's more of the sci-fi type.
Yeah.
I'm strictly high fantasy for the most part.
Well, I was talking with, I mentioned to you sort of offline that I had a great interview with Ted Naismith, which will be airing soon, last night. And the way I think I described it to him was, this is all about, I have a story going in the podcast and I do these interviews, but the most of the podcast is like the story of these characters. And I said, the interviews are really fun and good. The D&D is mediocre. So that's because, we weren't planning to podcast this. This was just a group of friends sort of sitting down and playing some D&D.
Oh, but you guys are so much fun though. Listening to you guys, it's amazing. But like you were talking to him about like this, the avatar that you had created and like talking, like bouncing the ideas that you had for the story off of him and the story so far. And of course, this was totally out of context for me. I'd never heard the podcast. So I was like, okay, well, I'm really interested. I'm going to go check out the podcast. And I binge listened until I ran out of podcast.
Well, I'm glad, that was a really fun interview. And Corey, actually, he lives up the road from me probably by 30 minutes. He's a real good guy. And he was, as I said, you probably listened to the full cast reunion for Rise of the Mormogil. And I gave him lots of love and credit in that interview, just because it's true. Like Corey, what he's done with his university and his institute, and just sort of in creating a community of people who are just willing to talk to some random guy on the internet who has a podcast. Like, he's really done amazing things. And I can see why you were searching for his podcast. But I'm glad you found my podcast.
Me too.
All right. So I think we've the next question I was going to ask is about other podcasts that you listen to, other than Adventure Zone, which is awesome. Liam, what are some of the other podcasts you listen to?
I don't really listen to any that consistently besides Inglorion Bastards. I do listen to, there's another D&D one called the Realms of Ukodor that I listen to off and on. That's pretty enjoyable. And I'll listen to Tolkien Professor every once in a while, but besides that, I'm just not really listening to that much podcasts.
Well, we're all about love around here. This is so I will put anything you guys mention, I'll put links to them in the description, and maybe we can get people listening to other folks' podcast. What about you, Bea?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Liam there. I don't really listen to podcasts that consistently. I've bounced by a couple of true crime ones because it fascinates me, but beyond that, not much, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling very special here. Well, okay. Well, we won't dwell on that question. So let's go to the next question, which is, I'm curious. You're probably at different points in the campaign in the podcast. For us, we're just into sort of Trials of the Valar, which is part 3, and I know Liam has been powering through them, but I don't think he's quite caught up yet. Liam, where exactly are you in Rise of the Mormagil?
As of right now, I'm on that interview with Riken, so I think that's 85, 86.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's shortly after the meeting with the Telleran elves.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So this question will set us up for some of the later questions, which are, favorite characters, favorite interview. What about you, Bea? Where are you fully caught up? Are you sort of listening as they come out at this point?
I was listening as they come out, but then I was really sad when I would run out, so I'm sort of saving them. I listen on my way to and from work sometimes. I'm actually at the Forges of Aule right now.
Oh, very good. Yes. So some really important things happen there. I don't want to ruin it, but this is also going to be tied into Maethras and the Golden Book, and there's a sword that sort of comes into play in that episode too, I believe. So yeah, that's a fun one. Let's see here. So we'll go right into the next question then. Now that we know where you are, Liam, do you have a favorite character?
That's a short answer. Not really, because I like all of them so much in different ways. As far as I feel like it's probably not a unique view. But as far as character development goes, definitely Riken. Just his character development has been wild from the get-go, and he's poor guy.
He's yeah, totally. We have you're not there yet, but we have an interview with Verlin Flieger, the Tolkien scholar, and we talk a little bit about that. She's written some books of essays that talk about, one of them in particular was around the wounds of Frodo Baggins, and sort of what happens to him after he goes home, and then later to the Undying Land, and we paralleled that with that of Riken. So you have that to look forward to coming up. I think I cut you off. Were you said short answer Riken? Was there a part 2 to that?
I also really like Tessero, and just because he's I feel like he plays the Hobbit very well. He's kind of aloof.
Terribly aloof. Yes. And actually, between you, me, and the world, now, Max's character, he plays Tessero. He thinks so deeply. He doesn't sort of pay attention in between, but he thinks so deeply when it's his turn. He does a lot of and he's the one character, the one player, I should say, that I have to edit most because there's just a lot of that filler, conversation. All right. Well, Bea, what about you? Do you have a favorite character?
Oh man, I'm kind of with Liam on this one. Riken has a fantastic character development. I also think that, is it Josh who plays him?
Yeah, Josh. Yep.
I think he does a really good job. Like,
yeah,
he stays so true to his character. It's absolutely admirable. So you got to tell him that from me, and maybe he listens. I don't know.
Yeah, I will definitely tell him. And he's actually he lives very close to me. We have kids the same age, and that's actually how we met. And Josh is actually a video game designer, and so he very much gets into the character and gets into the story, and will stay true to that. You're absolutely right.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I like Vic. And his Okran.
Yes, yeah.
I think he is a delight.
He's a bit how should we say, not politically correct. To
put it mildly, but it's refreshing.
Okay, well, I I do my best to I've not had to do a lot of editing, but there have been some places that I have cut out things that might be offensive to some people. It's hard to tell. We're dealing with the internet here. I figure just by me being on the internet, I'm offending somebody. He is a very fun character, and he also stays true to his character.
Yeah, he really does. And I don't know. I love them all so much, though. Having followed them through all of their trials, like, and also Tessero, yeah, I really like him too, and yeah.
Well, you might be angry with me here very soon. I'm not sure if you've made it to. Well, it sounds like you haven't made it to episode. It's either 104 or 105, but don't hate me around 104. Okay, that's all I can say.
Okay. Let me check how far I am at, so I can tell when I have to decide whether or not to hate you.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's go to the next question. So, favorite interview now. So the interviews for me is they just make this, right. There's a lot of time spent sort of editing and uploading, and I have the process down at this point after 100 episodes or so. But for me, it's all about the interviews. It's all about talking to people like you, talking to Tolkien scholars, and I honestly I didn't realize I enjoyed it as much as I do, and I look forward to all of these. And I in the last full cast reunion that we did for Rise of the Mormon, they asked me, hey, what was your favorite interview? And I tried to answer that in that interview, or in that episode. But I'm curious, what are your favorite interviews? And obviously this will be influenced by how far you are in the podcast. Liam, let's start with you.
It's probably the one with the Tolkien Professor, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just so fun to listen to you talk, honestly, both of you talk together. And, see you bounce ideas off of them, and honestly, it was just refreshing.
Well, I tried to let people know ahead of time, even with Fiona and Paul Strack, the Sindarin and Quenya experts that I brought on. I tried to tell them ahead of time, look, just because I'm running these ideas by you doesn't mean that I don't want you to like rip them apart, because I kind of do, right? Like I already know that I've made a lot of mistakes, and I actually lay that out in Rise of the Mormon, some of those, that last interview that I did, but what's really fun about Corey is that he kind of went on that ride with me, like he really kind of embraced talking about Durrance March and the nature of the Avathari, probably more than, I've tried to play this game with several people, but I think Corey really kind of went on that ride with me more than anybody else. Bea, what about you? Do you have a favorite interview?
Ooh, James Tauber.
Oh, really?
Yes. I studied, I studied English, and when I did my master's, I had this seminar with a professor about digital humanities, which really fascinated me, and then hearing about digital philology, which makes more sense. It's very similar, so it kind of reminded me of a very pleasant professor that I had. And it sort of, it just clicked with me.
Yeah. Well, kind of the way these interviews have come about, like we did the Quenya and the Sindarin, and then James kind of just fit right in there. He wasn't on my radar until I went to New England Moot here. So Corey said, hey, you should come to this moot. So I came, and I heard James speak, and I thought, this is perfect. And just the way he kind of flowed in right after the language experts fit in perfectly. And let me tell you, that guy is, I think I called him a Renaissance man on that, and he so is. But he was so humbled and like surprised to be asked. It seemed like it, but really he fit right in with all of these other world-renowned people, and he actually did another interview here recently on the Tolkien Experience podcast, which is really good. So if my listeners haven't heard that, they should go there and check that out. Liam, I think did you listen to that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Well. Let's see. Let's go on. I guess I have really two more questions for you. One is more of like going to be your chance to ask me a question. But so the last real question I have for you is, tell us if this podcast has inspired you at all to either pick up Tolkien again, or in the cases of some of my players, what they say is, I actually had to put down Tolkien for a while after this, or play more Dungeons and Dragons, and if you could sort of go into like how so, if so, yeah, that would be great. What about you, Liam?
Definitely with more Tolkien for sure. It kind of comes and goes. It's like ebbs and flows with how much I am into him and getting into his works. It was kind of more of like at the same time. So when I started watching the podcast, I was reading through the Unfinished Tales, and that was perfect. I decided to from there though to go in. I read book 1 of Fellowship of the Ring. I haven't quite got to book 2 yet. And but it really got me into Tolkien's other stuff. I finally finished reading his Beowulf translation.
Oh, very good.
And I'm not quite through Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But yeah, I really like to every once in a while immerse myself in Tolkien's works, just because he was so influential in a lot of ways, but I probably wouldn't be going too far to say that he was a genius with his fantasy works, but also in his scholarly works. But I audited a class from Signum, so I could get more of that. It's philology through Tolkien, and that's also been really helpful and enlightening. So.
Well, I think you're amongst friends here, so calling Tolkien a genius, I certainly wouldn't argue with you.
Me neither.
And I think you have something really to look forward to, and I think you'll really enjoy Verlin's. We did a 2-part interview with Verlin Flieger to kick off Trials of the Valar, so that's episodes 101 and 102, and we talk about some of those sort of non-Middle Earth Tolkien works that you brought up, specifically his some of his unfinished time travel stories. And some of his letters, on fairy stories, of course. But we talk about some of these other things, and sort of, as you know, Tolkien never really let go of something. Like if he started it, 20 years ago, he kept trying, and the stories might have kept evolving, but he sort of brought all of these ideas. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of like what Stephen King has done, right? And I don't know if you've read any Stephen King, but like, he lives in Maine, and all of his stories sort of take place up there, right? Like you got Castle Rock, and you got one story that refers to the rabid dog, right, which was obviously Cujo, and sort of he's sort of in all of his works, he's sort of connecting things and bringing ideas, back. And I love him for that. All right. Well, let's see here. Bea, what about you? Are you have you been inspired to play more D&D or pick up Tolkien?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I just finished rereading The Lord of the Rings again a couple of months ago while I was listening to the podcast. And then the podcast also, I missed D&D. And I haven't played any 4th or 5th edition really to speak of. But I went and picked up the Adventures in Middle-earth core rule books and started planning a campaign for my friends. So I have my husband in the campaign, my best friend, and then 3 people that I don't really know.
That's great.
And,
are they locals, or are you playing online?
No, they're locals. So we gather at our apartment like once a week, and it's really fun.
Well, I'm looking forward to this getting out there, and I hope that your answers and sort of talking about how you came to the podcast and what you've enjoyed will help other people appreciate it as well. So Now for the fun question, and this question is really not a question for me. It's what would you like to know? Ask me something. And I intentionally said, don't tell me your question before the interview because I like to be surprised. So Liam, if you have, I said bring 2 questions, but if you just have one, that's just fine.
Let's see. All right, I'll start with a really easy one, or maybe hopefully it's easy. If you had to go on a cross-country trip, who would you take and why? And you have 3 options. You got Aragorn, Gandalf, or Samwise.
Oh man, cross-country United States?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and you said Gandalf, Samwise, and who was the other?
Aragorn.
Ooh. Well, I guess if I was hiking, probably Aragorn. I think he would be great to have in the wild, and I enjoy his singing. So probably Aragorn. And if we were just like hiking like if we were doing the Appalachian Trail or something. Otherwise, honestly, I probably Samwise. I just think he'd be, he's funny. I think he'd be great to travel with. I wouldn't be getting lectured from Gandalf. I don't know. Is that the right answer?
It's all opinion, right? Do you like Samwise's singing too?
What I enjoy most about Samwise is his enthusiasm. His positivity, and he was so excited to see the elves. Right? He was always in Frodo's camp. Like I really like that. In some ways, I think he was one of the most important characters in the Lord of the Rings. All right, Bea, what about you?
My question is a lot more technical. So as a DM, how much planning do you put into each session, and how much room for the characters or the players to just kind of unfold do you leave?
Yeah, that's I think it's funny that you say that, because I really struggled with all of those things that you just talked about in all 3 parts, and I'll tell you why. Some of which I think we've talked about over the last 100 episodes or so. So we were on a very set timeline. So we did, we may have, I think this is episode 112. So, but that's not really how it worked for us. The way we played was, we did, 3-hour sessions on Sunday nights, and each part, right? So, Search for Tole Arasea was 10 episodes, or 10 sessions where we got together. So about 30 hours. Rise of the Mormogil was 10. Trials of the Valar was 10. I was very for me, I needed it very structured. We were getting ready to have our 3rd child. And so I kind of, was that played into it as well. And so in doing that, in being very structured, and having to get the players from point A to point B, I think I had to prepare a lot, but I also didn't give the players enough leeway when it came to being like, you know what, I think we're going to take this detour. What I tried to do more and more throughout the campaign is let them, give them options. Like in the world of education, which is what I work in, they call it acceptable alternatives, right? Like you give kids, you give them two alternatives, and you sort of let them pick, and both are acceptable, right? But I had to know from week to week what I was preparing, and I spent a lot of time looking at the maps, and making sure that each location had a particular feel. I think back to if you guys sort of in music class in 2nd grade, if you remember the Peter and the Wolf, that is kind of the classic thing that you listen to in grade school, where it's every character has an instrument. Right, so every character has a particular feel when you're listening to Peter and the Wolf. I tried to do the same thing with the campaign, where each map had, if it was Numenorian related, a lot of my maps ended up having, the white trees on them. And so like under Orthanc, there's, when they were checking out the catacombs, those maps had the white trees on them. When in Trials of the Valar, they go to Meneltarma, and I won't tell you who they encounter there, but they encounter somebody there. Those maps have the same sort of motif, and I try to do the same with music, although you can't hear it as much because I've tried to gate that out in the podcast. So I did spend a fair amount of time. Like I always made sure the maps were facing the right direction, north, south, east, and west, because as the characters traveled across country, I wanted them to get a sense of what direction they were going. Because fantasy for me is so much about geography and maps. When I read to my daughter at night, when we're reading, we just finished The Hobbit and we're on Fellowship now, right around, they just left Bree. I pull up Karen Wynne Fonstad's Atlas and we study those. And when I interview someone like Ted, the artist, I pull up his artwork and I'm like, oh, see, this is, look at how the pictures have changed over time. Like he's done 2 of these Balrogs or 2 of these Gondolins, visually, it was super important for me to get that right in the campaign.
That makes perfect sense.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, like it's like with Tolkien's work, it's very visual. So yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Great. All right, let's go back to Liam.
All right. So as far as Tolkien's works go, I've always loved the sense of humanity you get from some of the characters, or just in the whole thing, but specifically portrayed through some of the characters. And I really enjoy his gray characters, and I always thought the argument that Tolkien's world was black and white, good versus evil, and was kind of moot, because that just writes out all of the gray characters like Gollum or Smeagol or whatever, and Boromir, and even Isildur, or really anyone like Bilbo and Frodo are not 100% perfect, or a lot of the dwarves. And so I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, well, this sounds very similar to a conversation that I had with my brother. He's a Star Wars fanatic, and we've had lengthy, long conversations and arguments about gray Jedis and the nature of the Force, right? Like, is it all, does it have to just be, light or dark? And I always say no, absolutely not. And I think he's kind of come around on that. He's much more versed in Star Wars than I am. But just the philosophy of something like that, I think the same is true for any sort of high fantasy, right? Like Star Wars and Tolkien, it was epic, right? And it was epic fantasy where you're talking about the good and the evil. So it's easy to sort of be pulled into one of those camps and to want to like put characters into one of those camps. But as Verlin Flieger said when we talked, like, Tolkien was really writing about us. He was writing about people. He was writing realism, sort of disguised with dragons and little, creatures like Gollum. But he was writing about us, and I think there are nuances to all of these characters. And I think you've heard me say several times that my favorite character was Turin, and I think no one sort of personifies gray, if that's the way you want to call it, more than Turin, right? Like he was a great hero. I mean, he's gonna, in the Dagger Dagoreth, he is named as they essentially give him a spot amongst the Valar, right? I know it's not canon, but if that's how Tolkien thought of Turin. But at the same time, he killed his best friend, accidentally, but he still, people around him just seemed to die. Mim the dwarf died, right? Like we could go into his sister if you want to, but like I think the world is full of gray, and I think I think that's what makes it great.
I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah. All right, B. You have another question for me?
I don't actually. I just had that one question, and now I'm like sitting here like, oh my god, there's so much more that I could think of that was the overriding one inside my head.
Spoken like a true DM. I mean, those are the things we wrestle with, right? Like trying to create great experiences for our characters, and trying to balance life and with like this imaginary world that you're trying to make. I mean, it occupies a lot of my time. I also commute to work. I commute about 3 hours a day. And so I spend a good deal of that 3 hours every day thinking about the worlds. We just finished another D&D campaign called Symbian Revival, and I'm hoping to podcast it not like this, but more in story form, because it was a really I put a lot. I read like 14 novels about Symbia. Yeah, so I spend a lot of time thinking about the fantasy and sort of creating a realistic, although that's ironic, but a realistic environment for my players. Yeah. All right. Well, Liam, let's do, if you have one more that you'd like to ask, and then we can wrap this up, and I'll let you get back to your families and your lives. Liam, you have one more question for me?
I do. You kind of answered it as far as the Symbian revival thing go. I was going to ask, after the Trials of the Valar, what your plans were, and if you had any specific Tolkien plans, related plans, rather. So.
Well, for me, as far as Tolkien goes, I actually have most of my upcoming interviews recorded at this point. There may be a few that come up, but for me, it's hard to see past my trip to England right now, and I'm really excited for that, and I think it's going to be very cool for the people that are listening who normally listen on something like Spotify or Apple or some other audio only format. You're going to want to tune into these because I'm going to record all of the places where Tolkien grew up, places where Tolkien was in and around the time of the war, places that Tolkien honeymooned, right? And Tolkien himself would say that this trip is, that I shouldn't have done this trip because, knowing about him doesn't help me understand his stories. I mean, I think those were his words exactly. But for me, that's not how I operate. When I love something or someone, I want to just immerse myself in it, and so it helps me understand kind of his inspiration for some of these things, even if it's not accurate. And I haven't decided how I'm going to air them, whether I'm going to go in the order that I am experiencing them, or go chronologically in terms of Tolkien's life. But I'm thinking I'll start with Oxford, probably. So I hope everybody enjoys that. But to further answer your question, Liam, I just wrapped up Symbian Revival, which takes place in Symbia, which is in the world of Forgotten Realms, and it was left kind of open for DMs. It was like I referred to it, I think, as the Dungeon Master's Playground, where, you have some novels that are set there, but for the most part, it's where you have like the sword coats that's super flushed out. The far west, the far east in Symbia was left kind of just like, you have a little bit of history, but that you can kind of weave your own story in. My particular D&D Symbian Revival campaign that hopefully will come out soon takes place after the novel The Godborn. And so if people are interested in, if you're listening to this and you're finishing the Inglorion Bastards campaign and you sort of want to get ready for the Symbian Revival story that's hopefully going to come out on this podcast soon, definitely take a look at Paul S. Kemp. I believe I'm getting his name correctly. He did a few trilogies about Erebus Kale and the Uskevrin family in Selgant, and those are really, really well done, and they're all available on Audible. I'm not getting paid by Audible, but that's how I consume my stuff when I'm commuting. And outside of that, I think I'm actually going to play some Dungeons and Dragons. I have an Avarial elf I'm working on now. Somebody else is going to DM for me, and we're going to play in the world of Greyhawk. So I'm looking forward to playing because I'm not the best DM. I will be the first one to admit that. I'm all about story, and everything else kind of just falls off. Mechanics falls off. And sometimes I just like to play. I just like to get into the characters.
I think the playing of D&D and the podcast in general, or is a great way to exercise imagination, or maybe as Tolkien might put it, with subcreation, basically the entirety of On Fairy Stories. And I think you would approve of you immersing yourself in things to understand it better and to get the feeling of stories that you can create to be a part of his worlds. And even if that's in Sembia, which is set in the Forgotten Realms, I'm more of a Cormyr fan myself.
Yeah.
But, and I haven't read the Godborn, but I have read the Adversary and the Herald, so maybe I'll give the Godborn a try.
Well, the Godborn would be the last one. So there's the way they do it's interesting. I forget the name of the first book, but the first book is a collection of short stories which introduces you to the Eskeverin family. So the family patriarch, the two brothers, the daughter, and one chapter about Erevis Kale, who is the butler. And so that's kind of like I was like, what the heck am I reading, right? Like it didn't really flush out any one particular story, but the next 7 novels pick up where the short story left off on each of the characters. And so you really get to know Sembia, especially Selgant, and you get to know the Uskeverin family. And then as you're getting really interested in Erevis Kale, the butler, suddenly he has 2 more trilogies about Erevis Kale. And then the Godborn, which was supposed to be part of another trilogy, but I don't think Wizards of the Coast has made that happen yet. But I definitely recommend it.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for coming. Anything else you wanna say to the listeners or to me before we depart?
Thanks for allowing me to come here.
Yeah, thank you, man.
All right.
This has been great.
Well, I hope you guys continue to listen and continue to enjoy, and I'm sure I will talk to you online. Thank you. Though this marks the end of the episode, the road goes ever on. Until next time, join us at Longwinded.one and consider giving us a review on Apple Music, Spotify, or really whichever platform you choose.